Under Bond and Policy, none submitted. Operations, Superintendent Search, discussion with Dr. Michael Casserly, Council of Great City Schools. Tonight, Dr. Casserly, Executive Director of the Council of Great City Schools, will lead the board through a discussion about the priorities and goals of the Superintendent Search. Dr. Casserly supported USD 259 in 2008 when the board began the search that led to John Allison to Wichita. Dr. Casserly's national perspective and experience supporting boards of education across the country will give invaluable perspective as the board works to develop the candidate profile and begin a search. This item provides an opportunity for the board's discussion.
Mr. Casserly, welcome. We are so glad you arrived. It's been a little crazy up in Washington, D.C., hasn't it, lately?
It is. So I have this lavalier mic on. Can I speak both into here without creating feedback on the...
She will turn the mic off so your lavalier will pick up what you say.
Okay. Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's always great to be in Wichita. It's actually been some time, I think, since I was in Wichita, but it always feels like coming home. As I was mentioning to a number of people before this meeting, I was raised in this area of the country, so coming to Wichita always feels very familiar and very much like coming home. As was mentioned, I think one of the times that I was here last was actually about 9 years ago when the former school board president, Connie Dietz, had asked me to come to town and talk to the board. Some of the members are still here to talk to the board about the process of the superintendent search and what made for a good search and what made for a bad search and what some good practices were and what some cautionary tales were. And the outcome of the process led to your hiring John Allison, and I think, first of all, I'd just like to congratulate John on the extraordinary tenure that he's had here in Wichita. He is now one of the nation's longest running urban school superintendents. He was a finalist for the Great City Schools Richard Green Urban Superintendent of the Year award, and he's done a great job here in Wichita, and it's a tribute not only to him but to the Board of Education for the work that you've done together in on behalf of the school children here in Wichita. So I just wanted to pay tribute to the great work that John has done, and also to thank the board for its role in keeping John and supporting the work that the school district has done over all these years. So thank you to the superintendent, and thank you to the board. I think my charge here this afternoon or this evening is really to bear down on this question about characteristics of your next superintendent. And there's a number of things that I want to kind of pose to the board by way of discussion that kind of lead up to us paying some attention to what characteristics you want in your next superintendent. But I also want to indicate that if there are other issues that you want me to take up while I'm here, either anything that you've heard emerging from other major city school districts across the country, or anything that's going on in Washington right now. Already there has been some action on the regulatory front, and there's likely to be more with the nomination of a new Secretary of Education. But if there are other questions and the like kind of outside of the issue of the superintendent search, I'm happy to take those up. One of the things, Madam Chair, that you had posed to me that you wanted me to mention, and let me get this kind of out of the way initially before we move into superintendent characteristics, and that is who your competition is going to be. Now is the time every single year that the superintendent positions start to open up in big cities across the country, probably in other kinds of school districts as well. And sure enough, they are starting to open up, and you have got some competition here that probably suggests that this board ought to move quicker rather than slower, because you're going to face some competition. Now, some of these districts you'll compete against directly, some of which you won't, some of which their superintendency is open. They currently have an interim superintendent, and the board is taking their time with a search. In other cases, the superintendency has just opened up and the search process hasn't even started yet. But for these cities, you will see some kind of discussion about filling the superintendent's position over the next several months. And they include, in no particular order, Birmingham, Alabama, which I don't think you'll compete against directly. Cincinnati, Ohio, which may present some competition to this district. Fresno, California, which I don't think you'll compete against directly. Jackson, Mississippi, who I don't think you'll compete against. Oakland, California. Omaha, of course, which you would compete against. Portland, Oregon. Sacramento, California. That superintendent just indicated that he's going to be leaving, so a search process hasn't started. He's just made this announcement, but that city is going to be having to make some decisions here pretty soon. I don't think you'll necessarily compete against Sacramento, California, but it is a district that may open up. San Francisco has an interim superintendent. They're not moving very quickly with their search process, but they do not have a permanent superintendent as of yet. Same with St. Paul, Minnesota, which is a district that if they do a full-fledged search, you probably would compete against. So districts like St. Paul, Portland, Omaha, Cincinnati, you may compete against more directly. Other districts, probably not. But the 10, 11, 12 districts that are open, and there's bound to be a couple more here in the next few weeks and months, is about the same number of big city schools superintendencies that are open this time of year. So the number of vacancies is not unusual for this time of year. Typically, we'll have about 12 superintendencies that are open in January and February. Search process really starts in earnest, certainly in February and in March in particular, and in April. But the amount of competition that you have is not particularly unusual. People shouldn't be troubled by it, but it does suggest that the school system, to maintain its competitiveness and to stay ahead of the competition, probably ought to move expeditiously on its search process. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any initial questions before we kind of start on the discussion.
What kind of filter were you using in determining which district we would compete against and those that we wouldn't? Is it the size of the district, or
size
are there
of the
other
district,
filters?
demographics of the district, similarities in the district in terms of kind of community input, community expectations, and the like. It's just my sense of things, just from doing this work for about 40 years, not based on any quantitative criteria.
Yeah, I had kind of wondered if you were looking at those that mirrored us, because many times I'm aware that smaller superintendents of smaller districts, are the ones that's looking to move up to a larger district, and I just wondered if that factored in.
Well, it's still a great pipeline to look at. Now, it's unclear to me how many smaller towns, smaller cities might be open. I don't really keep as good a track of those as I do other big cities, but certainly people who are superintendents of smaller places and line officers in other major cities, including here in Wichita, make a perfectly good pipeline of candidates. So. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. So with the chair's permission, what I'd like to do is, at the end of our discussion here, what I'd like to have us be able to accomplish is to put down some characteristics that you really want in your next superintendent, but to aid in that process, to help you think more deeply about what kind of characteristics you want in your next superintendent. I'm going to suggest 3 other broad questions that I wanted us to drill down on, and I'm going to write these down on the board, and I'm going to turn them back. I'm going to write all of this up in the next day or so and turn it back to the chair of the board, probably by close of business Wednesday, something like that, because I know you're having additional deliberations with some survey data and some other things, so I want to give you the benefit of the work that we do as quickly as we possibly can. But there's a couple of, about 3 questions that I want to pose initially before we kind of bear down on the personal and professional characteristics of the superintendent that you want next. And the first question really has to do with context that the school district is operating in. And I noticed that a number of your previous speakers mentioned maybe some upcoming trends that the school district might be facing. And that's the kind of question that I really want to pose to the board, and that is, what's the political, not partisan, but political, financial, demographic, and educational context that the school district is in? And I ask that question because your new superintendent will be operating in a context that you probably better than anybody in the room is fully cognizant of as representatives of the community. But it's that context that I think is helpful for you to think about a little bit and to articulate as best you can, at least initially tonight, because the characteristics of the school system or the school superintendent will in part be informed by the context. That is, you're going to want somebody who is well versed in the context, somebody who can maneuver around the demographic, the political, the educational, financial situation that the school district is in. So question number 1 is really going to be what kind of context is the school system operating in currently, and how do you foresee that context emerging and evolving over the next couple of years? Second question, and this is a big question that some districts, some boards struggle with, and other boards can answer this question pretty quickly, and that is, what do you want the school district to look like in 5 or 10 years? What direction do you, as the board, want to take this school district in? Do you think the school district currently is moving in the right direction? Is it moving in the right direction fast enough? Is it a school district that needs to be, that you need to start all over with, that you need to blow up? I don't think that that's the case in this in Wichita, because you've been doing such a great job. But I pose the question because I don't want it to be left unasked. I think it's important for the board to say pretty clearly, not only to themselves but to the community, about the overall direction, because that also informs what kind of skills, what kind of person you want in your next superintendency. And then as you ask yourself or answer that question about the overall direction of the school district, ask yourself about whether or not the community is likely to agree with the answers that you as the community representatives are giving. The third question that I want to ask before asking about the characteristics of the superintendent is, what kind of challenges and issues can you predict over the next several years that the next superintendent is going to have to face? One of your previous speakers mentioned contract issues. Are there contract issues? Are there charter school issues? Are there financial issues? Are there takeover issues? Are there low-performing school issues? Are there accountability issues? You know better than I what those issues might be. And then think to yourselves, what is it that you can predict as the elected representatives of the community that the next superintendent is going to have to face? What challenges, and also what priorities are you going to want the next superintendent to bear down on? When we have the answers to those questions, then I think it becomes easier to figure out what kind of person do you need to address that, to operate in that context, to take you where you say you want to go, and to meet the challenges that you can predict that you're going to have. So does that sound right? It does. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just open up the first question, and I think we've got some markers here, and I am just going to put in shorthand down kind of some of the responses that we are getting. They don't have to be in any particular order. They can be kind of a stream of consciousness. They can be, I won't necessarily, if nobody sings out, don't make me call on somebody, because I think everybody has thoughts about maybe what the context is. But the first question on the table is just what is the context in which the new superintendent is going to have to operate, and that is what kind of political context, financial context, demographic, educational context is the next superintendent going to have to deal with.
And board, just for the sake of letting Mr. Casserly lead this discussion, he'll be the one that'll be recognizing you. It doesn't have to come through me.
Okay. Okay, and for anybody who may be watching this, I am not a professional facilitator. I do know how urban schools operate, and I've got a long history with those, but I'm not a professional facilitator. So if you don't see me doing this with the smoothness of a trained facilitator, that's the reason. So context, and again, political, and I don't mean by that partisan necessarily, unless you think that there's a partisan thing that needs to be called out here. But I'm mostly asking about the context that the next superintendent is going to have to operate in, because we're going to use that to inform what kind of persons you need in your next superintendent.
Would the leadership qualities be something?
Well, the leadership qualities, but what kind of context will your next leader be have to lead in?
But they would have a bag of tricks that they've done before that they're going to want to share, I would think, over time.
Well, they might. So you're jumping immediately to characteristics, but
Oh, I thought that's what you wanted, so.
Nope, not characteristics yet. We're looking now not for the characteristics of the person, but the context in which the person is going to operate.
Well, in Topeka, that's a huge issue with the whole political climate and budget that we're dealing with in Topeka?
I would say, on a continuum, I think we'll have we have a very stable local community, business, staff, because Wichita tends to be the stablest of all the levels. I think as we move up the chain, it becomes a little more unstable at the state and even more so on the national level, depending on the appointment of the secretary. So
I can vouch for the instability at the federal level.
the state has stabilized. I mean, we used to think that it was all the crazies in Topeka, and that has actually stabilized a little bit compared to we thought it was better on the national, and that's totally flip-flopped.
Okay. These don't have to be negative or positive. Some can be negative, some can be positive. I think the stability of the community is clearly a positive thing that the new superintendent will want to take advantage of, leverage on behalf of the kids in the school system.
Innovative, in the sense that we've relied, and I'm looking at that more in context than characteristics, simply as it has to do with how our schools are doing in the state, within the state, and that's been a huge concern that's been expressed.
An innovative environment that the school district
Can
pursues.
grow, right, continue to grow. And the other, again, is continuing with the building of goodwill with community and business alike.
Those are all great assets. And you want somebody who's going to be able to maintain those things.
I would also add that we have a very strong professional teaching staff, but they're tired and overworked and beat up, from all different levels. So, that's something somebody stepping in has to realize.
So somebody who might be able to strengthen teacher morale might be an important kind of characteristic. Okay.
And that's coming from all levels.
And I think that morale issue is not just with our teachers, although it is in our teachers. I think we're seeing that throughout the district because we've taken budget cuts for the last 6 years, and that's affecting all of our staff.
And to add on to that, as you're writing, because we frequently hear cuts as far away from the classroom as possible, so someone needs to be able to communicate how all of this fits together. You cut a counselor because that's not necessarily considered classroom, or you cut a librarian, or you cut a nurse, or you cut a custodian. All of that actually fits together, so that ability to show the importance of all of us working together.
Okay. Demographic characteristics. The school system's enrollment pretty steady, going up, going down.
We have been showing an increase, but I think this year has kind of stabilized a little bit, just a little bit of a decrease. So
Yeah, and
So
partly
pretty
that was
stable
because we
enrollment then.
stopped
yeah,
taking out of district people
that's
into our
been so
system. So
marginal,
that was
yeah.
one of the factors of that stabilization. So
Okay.
it's kind of plateaued.
Yeah, how about demographic changes? Enrollment staying the same, but is the makeup of the student body changing that a new superintendent is going to have to attend to?
And John probably could help us with that, because we've been seeing an increase in our Hispanic population.
We continue to
years.
see growth in our Hispanic students. We were seeing an increase in our free and reduced lunch numbers, but that plateaued just a little bit this year.
And you'd also have to factor in that free and reduced has certainly increased. I don't know if that's really
So
relevant.
you said it's about stable, or it's leveled off?
The last 2 years, we've leveled off a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Educational context, pressures from charters, anything, or private interests, or any of that, or is that not an issue here?
And we are seeing that. I mean, we're seeing, especially on the legislative level, more of a desire to see vouchers and
Yeah, I think-
private school.
Again, I think that's changing, that's stabilizing a little bit more, but there has been interest on the Topeka side to offer scholarships, for people to get tax breaks and sending that to private schools. We see some of that here in Wichita and throughout the state. The governor just called for more in his State of the State address, but that, like many of other requests, kind of landed flat. So I'm not sure if I have not seen anything in Topeka so far.
Not as strong as you see in other
Right,
places.
yeah,
But,
yeah.
okay. Facilities, pressures on facilities, anything of that nature? Or do you think this largely captures kind of the context that you're in?
Well, I think the facility is a positive. We're finishing our second bond issue, so we've caught up a lot with where we've needed to be.
I think that really
It's a
covers the
posting
heart
we
of the issues, more context.
Okay.
John took the job with starting a bond project.
Yes, I remember
I think
that.
one of the things that we probably need to add to that is,
Mike?
somebody that with a diverse understanding of everything that goes on in our district, it's, and being able to go and speak publicly, strongly, and have those understandings. I don't know if that's one of the, problems that I see with somebody that may not be as good a communicator.
Okay, so you think we've got kind of context down, and this is largely how the,
I'd like
So-
to add some things. I was just sort of waiting for people
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
finish. I have a few things I'd like to add.
Okay.
I think one context that's important to know is that this board and Superintendent Allison, before I was on it, started down a path of really changing some of the things we do in our district around education and literacy movement and behavior. And I think that's important for a new superintendent to know that it's not only innovative, but it's to take both on at the same time. I think that's
to
an
take
important
which two things on?
literacy and behavior at the same time. I think I'm just trying to look through my notes because I made some notes before I came. I think we're still in process with some of that work, and so the context is it's a work in progress. It's not done. We still have improvement. And one area that we've discussed as a board is around mathematics and mathematics education. I think another context that would be important for a new superintendent is that we take data seriously, so we look at data in order to make decisions. It's not, that's what our goals say, right? Shared belief.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
Okay.
I have some more, but
May I just follow up a little bit on what Joy just said? Because I think that's an important piece that I'm hearing from lots of different people as I just am talking to people in the community, is that they like the direction that the district is going. So the context isn't change it. It is develop it from here on. So it's taking our MTSS work and moving it to the next level, but not necessarily blowing it all up.
Okay.
And
So-
I'm going to take back what I said and add one more piece of context. I think something that's important for someone coming in to know is that our district has gone through 6 years of cuts, and this last year was pretty brutal. It was brutal for members of the board and for our community as well. And I think it would be important for people to know coming in that there's still some, I think we're all still dreading the next year because we still haven't necessarily gotten over. I see Mr. Rogers shaking his head. I'm not sure we're emotionally over last year yet, and we're already talking about this year. It's been a pretty brutal process here.
And I almost think that's covered under the first one, budget constraints. They are constraining.
Well, I have to say,
There's an emotional
you may
piece.
also
Yeah.
face it not only from the state level, but it may be coming from the feds too. Not if we can help it, but, so anything else that anybody wants to add on?
I don't know if it makes a difference, but the state will be doing standards again. They're starting that process this next year for state standards, so we'll go through some changes on that.
Okay, that's important. Okay. All right, good. We're going to keep this characteristics thing going and kind of revisit all of that. But let's talk about direction just briefly, and the chair mentioned that, but I just want to ask the question explicitly about whether or not the board feels that the district is going in the right direction, and you're going to want a superintendent who maintains that direction, maybe takes the next steps in that direction or accelerates that direction, but you're in general pleased with the direction that the school district has pursued over the last several years.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think the direction
And I don't mean, and by this, I don't mean satisfied. I'm asking the question about whether or not you think you're on the right track.
I think we're on the right track. I just think that we need to continue to move forward. The basis is in place. It's just that we need to move from home plate on to first base and second base and third base. We have the right plan. It's just that we need to continue to move forward and continue the trends that we're on.
And one of the
So moving from
inhibitors-
first base to, let me just bear down on this for a second. Moving from first base to second base or to third base, what does that mean?
With our MTSS and with our now Marzano, that's what it is, with our teacher evaluations and stuff. We have the stuff in place. We just need to continue to grow it. Thank you, Mike. We need to continue to grow what we've got.
I'll actually turn these things into sentences for the report. So,
I
Mike-
guess, go ahead.
Oh, because I was going to jump in just on Jeff's comment. This has probably been, over the past few years, the first time we've actually seen as much growth in subgroups. And that has been a hot button for us.
So you
So
obviously
we've
want that to continue.
we've actually seen, growth in subgroups. And so, that would underline the fact that I do feel we are going in the right direction. A big inhibitor has been the budget.
One thing I've seen too is, as you listed those cities that we're looking right now, I've been on the board now 16 years, and I've heard those names multiple times. Some of those are probably on their fourth or fifth
I was going to say,
superintendent.
since I was here last to do this, I think a number of those cities, Birmingham has probably turned over 5 times.
And Portland too, I was thinking that's been.
Portland's turned over at least 3. Cincinnati, I don't think has turned over. Fresno has not turned over. Jackson has turned over multiple times. Oakland has turned over multiple times.
So I guess in one sense, with us
Yep.
having 2, I mean, one of the things I've seen, research really shows that the longer you have a superintendent, the better your student achievement goes. So to me, that's something that's really important. So that's been good for our direction of doing that. You're not constantly coming in with a 100-day plan and things of that nature. So that maintaining longevity, leadership style is helpful.
It is helpful indeed. Longevity. I have to say, over all of these years, I have never seen an urban school district make progress by constantly turning over its leadership. And I think the trick for you, now that you've developed a strong track record, you've made real progress over the last several years, is moving somebody into the superintendency who can carry that agenda forward. This is the point where urban school systems typically get tripped up, is that sometimes when they'll bring in a new superintendent, it means changing the agenda or changing the direction that the school district is going, because the board hasn't been real clear with itself about what it wanted. So sometimes what happens is you'll hire a superintendent who has their own sense of direction, and it takes you in a place that you don't necessarily want to go to.
I think we're very fortunate as a district because we haven't had the superintendent turnover as you were talking about. We've had, let's see, I've been on the board, this is my 10th year. I had one superintendent. We've had 2 superintendents in, 19 years? That's not too bad.
Well, I have to say that besides the fact that Wichita itself is an attractive community for anybody, that the fact that this board has such a record of stability and keeps its superintendents and supports them and nurtures them and works together with them as a team, even when you have disagreements, will speak more loudly to any possible candidate than almost anything that you can possibly imagine. Because anybody who applies for this job is going to ask themselves the question, can I succeed here? If they see a board that's constantly turning over their leadership, they're going to answer that question by saying, no, I might as well rent. So don't move your family here because it's not going to last. So this board has created a track record that supports the superintendent, and that's what's going to really attract good people to this job. Okay.
I'd like to make a few comments.
Yeah.
While I don't disagree that there's some great things happening, and I don't think we need to make a 180-degree turn at all, there are some areas that while we've made improvement, we still have room to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you said that you're talking about general direction, but I think we need to be really clear that while we've had growth in our subgroups, our latest state assessments for college and career-ready math, our African-American students and our Hispanic students are in the 9% and the 15%, while our Caucasian students
I'm going to put
are in
this
the
under,
30%.
I'm going to put this under challenges, which is
That's
the next
fine. So we have made progress, but we haven't made enough progress. Same with our free and reduced students. Their college career for math, for college and career free and reduced students are in about the 15 percentile. 15% are college and career ready, and in the people who can pay for their own lunch, so I guess they're not poverty stricken, are in the 35 to 40% range. And that's a pretty significant difference, and if you pull districts around us, their free and reduced lunch versus self-paid lunches are not as wide range. And I realize that's a different district. Goddard is a different district than us. Andover's they have different challenges. But at the same time, when our students compete for jobs, that's who they're competing with. So if I compare them to Chicago or Sacramento, it doesn't really help because they're not competing with Sacramento for a job. The African Americans or free and reduced students who graduate from Wichita Public Schools are competing with Andover, Goddard, Derby, Mays, Circle. That's who they're competing with for a job. So I think it's been our goal to have the best urban education in the country, and that's one area where we still need to improve.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to put that as challenge.
That's fine. That's fine. I think that's an area of direction that we have struggled with the implementation of some of the ideas that we have. And so, for example, teachers getting materials late, the communication of what we think to the lowest level of employees so that everyone understands where we're all going. That plays a part in the morale issues we're dealing with.
And I think, just to be fair, and I appreciate all that you're saying, it's just amazing how, if you look at something over 5 years versus 15 years, if we are talking about growth, and you have a 5-year view versus a 10-year view, you really can see the improvements. So I agree with what you're saying, but I also feel that I don't want to short sell the accomplishments that we actually have made, because for a number of years, the growth in subgroup was stagnant. So, if you see 2%, 3% versus a few years when there's been absolutely nothing, is it great? No. Is it something that indicates we're going in the right direction? Yes. So, I think, Joy, what I'm saying is, while everything you're saying,
both of these things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
I think I started with that. I think I started with, I'm not saying we need to go different direction, but I'm saying these are things, when we think about direction, we need to make some corrections. And so part of the employee morale issue is employees not understanding why we're doing some of the things we're doing, or not getting things in the time that they need them to be able to understand what we're asking. So we need to make a correction in our direction, not 180 degrees, but a slight correction that says, let's make sure that we move forward on those. In our mathematics instruction, we need to make some correction. And I'm not saying we haven't already begun that work, because people have, but we need to make sure we continue that work, and our new superintendent knows that's the direction we want to go. And we're not satisfied.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. But I think even one of the challenges that we need to acknowledge, which we did not do in 2008 and 2009 when we selected John. When John came, even though we just passed a bond issue, so we were very excited about that, but that was the start of the Great Recession. We were, I think, interviewing November, December of 2008. But at the same point, we had we were in the third year of a funding increase for the Montoy case, and so we were expecting increased income, to do a lot of the things that we wanted to do. And I don't remember talking to you, John, during the interviewing process all about budget cuts or constraints or anything, because we weren't anticipating those. That was not something that was on our horizon. And it is now. It continues to be. And that was something that happened that totally changed the direction of what we as a board did and what the superintendent did. So those budget constraints really had a lot to do with why we couldn't do some of the other things. But I think that's the thing we have to be aware of, is that that could happen again. So we've got to be prepared for it. And at the same point, know that we're also sitting close to a court case that could move us in the other direction. So we've got to be ready to move in that way. So we've got to be very nimble. It's a challenge that we would be facing.
Okay.
Another one of the directions is we need to continue with our community relations and build on our community relations. We've done that well in the last few years, and I think that's something to continue building on.
Okay.
That's
So what I'm hearing is right track, maybe some tweaking, and some new emphasis on things like gaps in mathematics and the like, but the overall strategic framework that you're using to move forward is essentially the right one.
Yeah.
Okay.
We agree on that.
Yeah, I think I could agree with that. I really want, and I don't know if this goes under direction, but we also need to be better at singing our own song, because we really are doing really nice things for all students in this district. We're not where we want to be, but I think because we're going in the right direction, we've got to do a better job of letting others know about that, because I so often out in the community especially will talk to somebody and they still think there's Indians running loose in our buildings, and that's just not true.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of like we had grizzly bears.
Okay.
I think that covers it.
So as the community hears this conversation, would they add anything else to it in terms of direction? Or you think you're capturing the direction that you want to see the school system go in?
Okay, I'm going to add one there based on, Miss Logan and I met with parents in my district this last week, and one thing that they did talk about was a concern about whether teachers were losing opportunities to be creative and innovative in the new framework, and if there are ways that we can communicate better with staff around where they can be creative and innovative. If they feel like they can't be, that's not ever been the kind of message that I've heard board members say, but how can we make sure that we don't lose that?
Okay. I think you got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to, we don't have a whole lot of wall space that we can use here, but
The top one may need to come off first because it's stuck. It's the sticky stuff.
okay. I want people to be able to, there we go. All right, challenges, priorities. And we've spoken to some of those already. Some communications issues, some gap issues.
I think you need to put budget on there again. It's in context, but it's a huge challenge too. The way budget, affects all of that, all of our challenges. It's the biggest challenge we have is our budget.
And it severely has impacted our capacity, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we've been looking at this year is workload for all employees, because as we've had to cut or not add new teachers or staff, then we've had to figure out what can we ask people to have, and we felt what we're hearing from teachers and employees is that the balance is, it's too much work, so we need to balance that better.
Okay. And I also heard that you've got, the next superintendent's going to have to deal with employee contracts.
Well, that's every year.
every
We do
year.
that every year.
Yeah.
But every year's.
Are they up every year, or is
Yeah.
it just a road?
Yeah, we did every year.
Who thought of that? No offense. That's a bad
Maybe you
idea.
can come back and we can talk
Straight
about
from
that some
Washington,
more.
D.C.
Let's talk about that some more.
Okay, so with all groups
Yep.
every year?
And fortunately, I mean, we have two groups primarily, so that's really beneficial compared to some urban districts that have 8 or 9 unions, but,
Yeah, I think the average is 9.
9,
Statistics.
so, yeah.
So you've got
So,
2.
but again, the biggest constraint has been that we've not been able to raise
To raise them.
any salaries or
Yeah.
benefits, those kinds of things. So again, that goes back into the morale issue and things of that nature, so. So it's how do we adequately compensate our staff for the work that they do?
Yep.
My understanding is that several members of our senior team are thinking about retiring in the next few years. So I think that would be important for the next superintendent to know that there's going to be a challenge of figuring out who the new people on that team are going to be,
Yep.
identifying them and making sure we get
That's
that
a good
team
one.
together.
Yep.
And then also we have a lot of teacher turnover. We have a lot of retirements.
Yeah.
That we're kind of hitting that age and we're having shortages. And so how do we find people and get them in and
Yeah, the whole
and then we
state is
lose
facing
the we lose the whole state's facing that,
But
and we
it's-
lose that seniority and that experience in the classroom. So how does that impact?
So what's
Our
the
staff.
annual teacher turnover rate?
We all looked at John Allison. I just want the record to state that. And he
Johnson,
looked at
you remember
Shannon.
we were just looking at that. About 250 teachers a year, roughly 6%.
Oh, all right. Then you're considerably below
Right.
most big city school systems, which average someplace between 12 and 15%.
There was recently a committee on that, and it was very interesting because, and I don't know if they ever found the answer, but the number of actual teachers in Kansas, it was really significant, and they were trying to figure out where that gap occurred. Those that could teach and those that were actually teaching, but yet they remained here in Kansas. So
Yeah, I think
I'm
one time
not
I heard
sure what-
we have 75,000 licenses that aren't
Right,
active.
that-
you know, at least.
yeah.
And the other
Do you
thing
have
is
a- do
there's
you have a
just,
shortage problem?
well, we have a shortage problem. There's a huge drop in the number of students going into teachers' programs all over the state.
And we have an early retirement here, so we have a lot of teachers that are now starting to get into that early retirement age who are opting to leave early, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that, so.
Yeah.
So on top of our normal retirements, we're just starting to kind of get to that, where that's
So
going
the
to start
next
taking off.
superintendent's going to be facing some of
Yeah,
those issues.
There's such a big discrepancy because yet Kansas is still ranked, and this is according to a recent study, number 10 in student-to-teacher ratio. And that we really have an extremely low ratio. It's not just Wichita, however. It's all of the smaller school districts that would bring that average down. So that's kind of where the problem is. We're the largest school district, but there are a lot of smaller school districts. And so one of the
That
huge
you're
problems.
competing with.
Yeah, yeah. And that's been huge. So I'm not sure if they actually completed the study on where those teachers are that are, licensed, but not necessarily in the field, and what's happening to them.
It is going to be critical as we look at over the next 3 to 5 years. The colleges with schools of ed in Kansas are down anywhere from 30 to 35% in the number of students enrolled. So as
Yeah, I think
as
this
our
is a
teachers
national
retire,
phenomenon.
and we're right in that cusp. But that's been something that Kansas really has been fortunate, both with our state schools and the small private schools, they've done a good job in providing those candidates. So Texas and other places have come to us to recruit, and part of it's because of budget. We're now seeing the opposite. They're coming and
right?
recruiting from us.
Other issues like major facilities issues that the next superintendent, I know John's taken care of a lot of this over the last several years, but anything on that front that's coming up? Yeah, Troy?
One thing that I've been hearing a lot, and then as I started asking these questions, I heard this challenge in my district. In the southeast area of town, there's a lot of population growth. So some of the schools that, like McAuliffe, that we built new, and Seltzer that we changed boundaries, and so its population went down, but they're starting to rebound and fill up. And so we're probably going to have to look in that area of town at what we're going to do. I think CMA was supposed to be really a middle school, but now it's a K-8, and we're going to have to think about what are we going to change a boundary, or are we going to move something around, are we going to build a new building? We're going to have something in that southeast area of town. And I think Spirit is just committed to being here, so they're planning on having more and more people in that area. It's good for Wichita.
Hardly anything.
Let's see. So you mentioned, or someone mentioned earlier about the growing number of Hispanics. So are there emerging language issues that are continuing?
Continuing, yeah.
Okay.
Refugees.
So are you getting refugees here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That probably is a big issue we should put up there, because we're getting a lot of refugees and we have no funding for those new refugees. And we're talking refugees, I think Superintendent Allison said they haven't been in a school. Some of them never held a pencil. And so we're just kind of trying to handle that.
Yeah, some of the other cities are having huge issues on that front, particularly with kids who have no formal education where they came from. So does this basically capture it? Other priorities that you think the board, new superintendent comes on board, the board says, we want you to take up the following three things. What are those likely to be? Or have we already named them?
I can start that off, if I may.
Yep.
Because one of the things that has happened over a period of time with budget cuts, from the administrative standpoint, jobs have been added on. Okay, let's put this job here, let's put this job there. Who can take on some extra work? So I think it would be going in and, how I'm going to say, restructuring job descriptions, who's doing what, or how we can get that balance a little more in order, because it's fallen on everybody's shoulders to take up slack where they can.
Okay.
One of the
Anything
things that
else?
we've mentioned, but I'm not seeing it on that list, is continuing to involve our community. John's done a great job of involving the community businesses and the Chamber of Commerce and everybody else, and we don't want that to get away from us. It's a challenge to continue that, to make that a priority when you have 15,000 other priorities.
Keep community support. The fact that you've got such strong community support is, I have to say, something that's the envy of other big city school districts across the country. Some have it to some extent, but the backing that you enjoy from your community, you don't see in other places. So it's something you ought to be proud of. Okay, we done with this?
Yeah.
Okay. Madam Chair, what are you thinking by way of time?
Oh, we're fine. Keep
fine.
going.
Okay.
We gave you until midnight, if that's okay.
I'm sorry?
I'm kidding.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I said that we gave you till midnight because I knew we'd get a rise if I.
My bedtime's 9.
Yeah, so it's mine. Okay.
Mike, we might need some Scotch tape or something.
Yeah, I want to keep these basically in front of you because I want to go back to what each of these things told you about the kind of person you need in this job. I mean, some of this is personal characteristics that you might want to put up here. Some of them are professional characteristics. John will tell you one of them, if you don't put this down, that he'll probably insist on, that is a sense of humor. But think about what the next superintendent will face, the challenges, the priorities that you will have, the context in which they will be operating, and the direction that you want the school district to go in. What kind of skills will that person need to have to operate in that context, to take you where you want to go, and to address the challenges and priorities that you've got?
For me, the most important characteristic of our next superintendent is that it's a person who has the personal strength to do what is right. There's a lot of, we've listed a lot of challenges and things that we need to think about with our direction, and there's a lot of pressures on a superintendent in this kind of small fishbowl that we all live in. And so really just at the end of the day, that everyone knows that that person did what they thought was right.
Yeah, a sense of almost moral clarity and certainty and courage
Yes.
is something that really good superintendents like the one you have possess. And if they don't, they lose their center, and they get buffeted by forces that get out of control. So it's a really important characteristic. I would characterize it as moral courage, but you put it as kind of personal strength. But I couldn't agree more.
I think they need to be approachable.
And by that you mean?
Approachable.
That is, you can walk up to him and...
Or her.
John's very approachable.
You mean accessible?
Yeah, accessible, approachable.
Let's not assume it's a man. Excuse me.
Yeah, there's,
Doesn't have to be.
I don't think I have to wear a suit and tie to approach John and visit with him. I just,
What?
Along
he
with
makes me
that,
wear a tie on Monday night, but that's about it.
along with that, I would like to see somebody who, by being approachable, they make the first step. In other words, they go out to the buildings to talk to people, because I keep hearing people say, I want to see the superintendent in our buildings, or whatever. So part of that approachability is that they don't just stay in their office, they move out.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that there's not a whole lot of superintendents who are invisible. It's kind of hard to be a superintendent and to be invisible. But there are some that I'm kind of surprised that are more kind of office-bound than you would think. All right.
Well,
A number
sorry, I
of you
keep-
mentioned budget as challenges, things as superintendent, what kind of skills is the next superintendent going to have to deal with that?
They're going to have to be willing to work with Topeka, you know, and get out.
I think it's somebody that can hold their own with Topeka and our legislative delegation, as well as, you know, understanding the nuts and bolts of the budget, you know, why we do and what we don't do.
I think someone with a good health because their blood pressure is going to go up, dealing with Topeka.
I'm sorry?
I said it has to be somebody in good health because their blood pressure is going to go up, dealing with Topeka.
Low blood
Yeah,
pressure?
they need to be healthy, but
Well, you know, that it's not you say it in jest, but the ability to handle stress is.
that's good.
I think one of the other things we need to think about as a board too is, can we expect them to be doing two jobs?
Exactly.
You know, superintendent and chief operating officer. You know, that probably is not fair or right.
He probably needs an explanation.
Yeah, John has been filling two roles for the last few years and taking the chief operating officer job as well when we didn't fill that for budget cuts. So that's a lot to ask out of somebody.
I was going to say, why did you ask him to do that?
We didn't. He's just that kind of person. And so it's always been a challenge to get
I kind
people
of
to
get
understand
that, but that's ridiculous.
But we're in a state and an environment where we
so
don't want to
good
pay for
operating
administration. Yeah.
Somebody tweet that out,
Yeah.
that he said that was ridiculous. Somebody
it's
with their
always
Twitter
a
open.
problem
I
with
see some Twitter accounts going now.
Tweet that out, there you go.
with the cost. The public doesn't appreciate.
So my advice would be hire yourself a CLO.
Yeah.
The superintendent's got his hands full.
Needs to be thick skin. Needs to be brave but humble.
I'm sorry?
Brave but humble.
Do we put walk on water too?
I was holding that for later.
Oh,
I want to give all my answers early. It looks like I'm,
I think that is good, though. I think somebody who has some results, not somebody who can talk a good game, but somebody who's done something with their career, you know.
So somebody with
Experience sounds like what you're saying.
Well-
senior experience.
Who, for some of the challenges we're looking at, who's maybe handled those, and they can point to, these are the results of what I was able to accomplish. I mean, when Superintendent Allison leaves, and I'm sure when he was interviewing, he was pointing to all his great results. So we want somebody who has results, not just good ideas.
somebody that doesn't talk to other school boards when they're looking for a job.
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what was that?
Joy just asked if that was a joke. Yes, that is a joke.
Okay. All right, I didn't hear it, so I didn't get it down. Okay, so, a number of these are personal characteristics. They're great characteristics because really effective school superintendents are kind of a breed apart. I mean, they're centered. They can take stress. They communicate well. They are approachable. What kind of additional professional skills will they have as you kind of look at the challenges that they're going to be facing, in addition to budget? Presumably, you want them to be the COO and the budget director and the superintendent. You mentioned, bearing down more on achievement gaps. You mentioned bearing down on math. You mentioned continuing the progress you've made on MTSS. So what kind of skills does the next superintendent have to do those things?
I think one of the things that's critical to doing that is that they understand curriculum and how to lead that kind of work. They're not just a manager, they really understand the work of schools.
Really, the number one thing that we want out of superintendent is their academic skills, because that's where we're going to move forward. I mean, that's what we talked about in '08, and I know before too, and that's really important, curriculum and instruction and moving our children forward. I mean, that to me is very, very important.
You said it a slightly different way at the beginning.
The academic side of the job. That's, to me, is more important than the budget, the operations. I mean, those are things they have to understand and make it practical, but the academic skills are really what will get us moving forward, continue us to move forward.
And that's what you're in business for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think leading into curriculum, they have to have the understanding of all of our diverse type curriculums that we have, special ed, you know, those types of things that might not fall on a lot of districts or not be as heavy as we are. I also think that they need to have some expertise in the buildings, understanding what it takes to put a roof on a building or how to deal with those types of things also. I guess that would be infrastructure or those types of things.
Okay. Now, one of the things that a couple of people mentioned was, and particularly if you're going to do this on an annual basis, your employee contracts. What kind of skills is your, not everybody has expertise doing annual collective bargaining. What skills do you have to have? John, you may want to sing out on some of these.
Because Kansas doesn't have typically multi-year contracts, we do our collective bargaining really by committee, so that we have a team that works with the opposite team. So being able to keep up on what's going on in those discussions, those types of things, and to be able to provide appropriate guidance is important when you're doing them on an annual basis.
I think they also have to have the ability to manage a team, put a good team together, you know, for those things.
Kind of embedded in that is just the ability to form, manage, direct, collaborative teams or cross-functional teams.
Right. And I think one of the other things, and we don't talk about this a lot, but you know, we don't want to ask them to give up their family and themselves, you know, and we may think that's funny, but it's one of those things that we can't ask them to sacrifice their family for the benefit of the community. They've got to keep that in balance too.
I would prefer, I would just prefer that they would have a doctorate degree, but I don't think that's something that is a deal breaker. Would you?
Yeah. What do people think about that? Is a doctorate degree necessary? Is having ever been a superintendent necessary?
I think it's a preference. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it would be a preference that they have some experience or at least have been a number 2, number 3, you know, up in, that's just a preference for me.
What do other people think about that?
Actually, even when we were interviewing John, that was one of the things that the board wanted. I think even in the previous superintendent, it's been a preference. It doesn't eliminate considering them if they don't have it, if they have all of the other skills. But our preference has been they have all of those skills and the doctorate as well.
I think one of the things in Kansas we talk about is that leadership is an activity, not a position. And so I think it's, and I don't know exactly how to say this in 3 words or less, so you can figure out how to do it. But it's important to know that there is a leader, there is an authority in charge of the district, that's the superintendent. But that person sees that leadership can be at all levels of the organization, and that when everyone is exercising leadership more, it's good for the total outcome. So it's not just authority sits in this one chair, it's this
Ability to share leadership?
ability to share leadership. You know, even custodians can be leaders and paras can be leaders in their sphere of influence.
I have to say, it's an absolutely fantastic quality, and I think the better superintendents and better leaders, even in Washington, that I've seen over the years, have this ability, and they never make it obvious, and it's a real art form, and it's really leadership at its finest, when people are able to everybody knows who's in charge. Everybody knows who is ultimately held accountable. At the same time, their ability to convince people or to build ownership for the overall work and to create a sense of leadership and responsibility amongst all of the people in the institution is a real skill. And extremely rare. So I'm glad somebody.
I think to get back to your first question about skills and education, I think experience is more important to me than education. I think there needs to be some minimum standards for education, but I think the leadership can be in many different ways, maybe not an assistant superintendent or a superintendent in another district, but something that sets them apart as far as a leader in what they've done.
How about things like urban experience? Do they have to have worked in a system like this, in a big, diverse, sometimes complex, even messy system? Is that something that matters, or do you really care?
I think it does need to have an urban background, because I think somebody coming from western Kansas to Wichita would be so overwhelmed that I think that's where I'm thinking experience is, dealing with those types of things, because this is a unique piece of education right in the middle of Kansas. And even 10 miles from here, the education experience is different.
Yeah, you don't look much like
No.
anybody else in the state.
And diversity is critical
Yeah.
to have that experience, because there's evidence that we are very fast going back to a lot of one-race schools and the problems that face. Diversity is key.
I think maybe I would tweak that just a little bit to say in a large district with diversity, not necessarily urban, because there are suburban districts in large metropolitan areas that would not be considered urban, but they would have some of the same characteristics possibly as ours, that I wouldn't want to rule people out just because they were from Lakewood, Colorado, instead of, I mean, yeah, I agree, Western, a small, really small district in Western Kansas, that would be different, but, a Lakewood, Colorado, which is a pretty diverse area, it's not an urban school district, it's not part of the great, but they have a lot of the similar issues that we would have. So I wouldn't want to just say no because it wasn't our definition of urban.
I think when you talk about diversity, that's one thing, but I think the other thing that we need to really consider is somebody that's has an understanding of poverty and what that brings to the education experience also.
I'd like to add one thing, and then I think I'm starting to see a lot of the same kinds of things coming around, and it's been a great discussion.
Are there things on the context, things that we've taken, that we've mentioned before that somehow we have not articulated as one of the
things that I'm not seeing up there is, and vision is a big word, but I think when you're really looking at a superintendent, I'm looking for someone who can see that big picture and help others to see it. And that's what a person that kind of has vision, you can look beyond the day-to-day and the getting stuck in the budget and everything else and look to that big picture, and that's been something that Mr. Allison's been excellent at, helping others see where we need to go. And are you, just as a board, are we seeing things that we need to add that we've forgotten? We've got a lot of things up here.
Yeah, on that, this is one of those things where kind of being clear on your direction as a board is important to jibe with your next superintendent, because you don't want to have a direction that is different from what your next superintendent has, because that's kind of a recipe for disaster. And it's one of the reasons for asking some of these kind of initial characteristics or initial questions before we get down to kind of personal characteristics, because sometimes people will come into a school system and have their own direction, and before you know it, the board's going, gee, that's not what I thought we were hiring. And sometimes that situation arises when the board hasn't been clear with itself, where do you want to go? What is your context that you want your next person to deal with? What challenges do you want them to address? Sometimes that mismatch is because the boards don't ask themselves critical questions about what it is they want, and not just somebody who has certain personal characteristics, but sometimes people bring their own sense of vision and direction and their own theory of action to the work before the board ever realizes that they've never quite articulated one of their own, and they've hired somebody who's got something that they hadn't expected. So, and this is why it worked so well with this board in John, is that you've got a convergence of an understanding of what your overall direction is and how it is you're going to get there. Now, you may disagree on some smaller tactical things, but the overall direction and strategy for getting there is approximately the same. And that's why the board and the administration can work as a single team on things. And frankly, is what separates urban school districts that make progress from those that don't. Mm-hmm. Because you'd be surprised how many times the board and the superintendent are not on the same page because they never had a clear understanding of each other and discovered that they were a mismatch from day one. So is there anything that we have put down on challenges or direction or context that suggest a characteristic, a skill that your next superintendent needs to have as your entertaining candidate? Just let everybody kind of go through the list and make sure that we've covered things. And the reason, again, for asking these kind of introductory questions is to anchor the question about characteristics in a broader strategy, context, and direction. So you're not just putting down personal characteristics of what it is you want, but that the characteristics match up against the challenges and the priorities that you know are going to face your next leader.
I'm seeing
Okay.
that we
You're doing
are
great.
not
You're
seeing
doing
things
great
that-
work. So.
I have a question about next steps, because obviously we are going to be meeting again on Friday at 3 o'clock at the AMAC building. And the reason for that is we're going to hear the report from KSDE with the survey results. They're bringing those survey results. KSB, beg your pardon. KASB, I apologize, wrong initials. We also, will look at any community meetings that you've had or that I've been meeting with some people, and you'll have all of those results before, and Mike's report, so that we can put the final product together for the profile for our superintendent. My question to you, Mr. Casserly, is there one format that's better than another format for a profile?
I don't think so.
So it's just however we want to.
I think it's however it is you want to consider those three pieces of evidence. And it sounds like your community has given you good feedback. Again, I would no doubt the survey and the listening sessions and all of this that you've had probably are also going to produce other items that we didn't necessarily think of tonight. But I think I would encourage you to try to make sure that the characteristics that you come up with speak to the direction that you want to go to that you anchor those characteristics in what it is we tried to take up tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But no doubt there's going to be other things that others have come up with that
Well, and we will
add
see,
to this.
we will see things that repeat themselves too. Some
Yeah.
things are going to rise to the top more than others.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
Anything
Is
else
my-
you would?
Is my work done here?
Well, if the board tells me, I think your work is done here.
Thank
Are you all okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very, very, very much.
Okay.
We've got a great start to be able to put our final profile together.
Well, let me just thank you and thank the board. It's sometimes I can ask these questions and not have the kind of thoughtful discussion that we had tonight, where kind of people waded in with lots of good ideas. They could take the better part of a day and not come up with lists as good as you did, or the ability to articulate what you've done. So my hat's off to you for kind of thinking clearly about this and knowing what you wanted, because a lot of people don't.
Well,
So
we
thank
want
you.
the best superintendent to follow the already best superintendent.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope you'll stay in touch. Okay.
See,
Thank
you
you.
should have given him the award this year.
I'm sorry?
You should have given him the award this year, and then
Would that have done it?
you just never know.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, I don't do the selecting.
Yeah. Well, we will look forward to having your report back.
Yep, I will
And,
get that back to you by
We thank you
Thursday.
so very much for coming and leading us through this discussion.
Okay, and somebody took this down. I'm going to take the sheets with
Yes, I
me.
think this has been transcribed. I'm not sure
Okay.
which one of our staff is doing it, but it's, you should have it. What you've written on there should be transcribed for you so that you can work with it.
Okay.
They
And if you
won't
don't
have
mind,
put
I'm
it
gonna
into
take these
sentences.
with
They'll
me.
have it down just the way that you have it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate your
All
help.
right. Thank you.
We look forward to being able to work with you another time, but not for a new superintendent for a long time.
Yeah, please don't have me back on this.
That's exactly
This
right.
topic, yeah.
We
Anytime
like
soon.
longevity in
Yeah.
superintendents.